Information and help. They gave me some other information on baptism as well. If you have any questions on baptism that you want answered, want us to discuss, not a problem, just let me know, and we'll talk about it. We'll throw it out there. Also, any resources that you have, love those resources, so throw them my direction. We are studying baptism. And if you recall, last few weeks, 2 weeks ago, we talked about why we study the topic. Last week, we discussed Jesus' baptism and his commandment for us to be baptized, to go into all the world, and baptizing those around us. We kind of put it in a context so that we could better understand it. And what we said we were going to do is we were going to start at the middle in our study of baptism, which is Christ, and then we're going to kind of work our way out. And we will be doing that. In our definition of baptism, baptism is believers choosing to get rid of the old life and enter a new life and family in Christ. Baptism by immersion for believers is essential for the remission of sins and is necessary for salvation. We were shown Christ as our example, and he commands us to be baptized. I have added that since last week. If anybody objects to that, I'm sorry. You can see me afterwards, but I'm probably not going to take it off the screen. I mean that in the most loving, kind way, of course. Let me go back here for a second. Leslie and I were talking after class the other day. And as we go back, and we're going to go back and look at the Old Testament a little bit about baptism. And she kind of had the same question that I had when I started studying this baptism thing. John the Baptist, let's call it, I don't mean to be rude, but he was a little awkward by that modern day standards. He wasn't a person that people would just normally gravitate to. So he goes out into the wilderness and he says, "Come, be baptized." People don't go, "What? What is he talking about?" You have a guy who eats insects and honey. He doesn't naturally draw people to him. And it's not like people didn't know what baptism was. They didn't come out and they go, "Hey, I appreciate the honey, but what is this baptism thing?" The day of Pentecost, Peter stands up and he says, "Okay," they go, "Men and brethren, what should we do? Repent and be baptized," right? He stands up and he says that. You don't have people going, "What do you mean by baptism? Because we don't know what you're talking about." Nobody asked that question. So, my question is, and it kind of was Leslie's, and I'm speaking for you now, Leslie, so if I'm wrong, please jump in, but why wasn't somebody asking that question? Well, the reason why they weren't asking that question is they knew what it was. They knew what baptism was. Well, why would they know that? Because if you go look at the Old Testament, and if you look up the word baptism in the Old Testament, that word does not exist in the Old Testament. And if somebody's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, time out, Reednauer, you're wrong." You're right, I am wrong. I am wrong. It was called washings in the Old Testament. Sometimes ceremonial washings. Michael's talking about it on Sunday morning in class, talking about Leviticus. That's the cool thing about it. It wasn't a foreign concept. If you weren't here when I first started the class, I'm going to share a story with you. If you were here, I'm sorry, you're going to hear it again. But I worked at the Jewish Community Center in Nashville for a summer. Needed a summer job. One of my buddies lived in Nashville, so I moved down to Nashville for a summer and worked there. And I learned a lot about my Christian heritage working at the Jewish Community Center. They started talking about celebrating the Sabbath, and all of a sudden we're celebrating the Sabbath, and there's bread and there's wine or grape juice. I'm like, man, this looks really familiar. I've seen this somewhere before. Oh, wait a minute. Jesus was using, it made sense. Same thing with this. He didn't just pull it out of the air. It wasn't a brand new concept. We'll talk more about John's baptism here in a couple weeks. But what was John's job? Prepare the way, right? Prepare the way. He's going to take this ceremonial washing thing and he's going to help transform it into what Jesus is going to do with it. It wasn't something brand new, is my point. I went a whole 3-minute discussion for something I could have said in one sentence. Sorry about that. So we're going to look at that. And hopefully by the end of this week, or if we can't get all the way through it this week, you'll understand better what I'm talking about, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. There's a thing that people talk about, and you've heard me talk about it. A lot of times we assume people know what we're talking about. And that's a problem in communication. My wife thinks I'm saying one thing. I'm saying something else. They don't always go together. Anybody else have that problem in their lives, in their marriages, every once in a while? Yeah, right? No, never. Yeah. You're not on the same page. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay? There's two words that I've heard growing up in the churches of Christ. I've grown up in the churches of Christ. And there's two terms that I didn't fully understand. Type and anti-type. Anybody ever hear those two terms? A couple people have. The rest of you are looking at me like I'm, okay, here, it is okay to raise your hand, I promise. And this is yes, this is no. Okay, a couple people have. No, some others. Okay. Well, I've always heard this type, anti-type thing, and it always confused me. I never knew what was the type and what was the anti-type. And anti means opposite of in my mind, but not necessarily in this case. So let's research this just for a second because it will play into as we go into the Old Testament. The anti-type is the image. Okay? The type is the shadow of the image. Perfectly clear, right? No. The type is the person or the event that is a foreshadow of a person or event. Let me give you an illustration. Turn to Numbers 21. Now, who was here last week? Okay. Is there anybody tallying how many scriptures I get wrong this week? Okay, great. Thanks, Linda. I appreciate that. Don't think I didn't. The reason I was late is I was going through every one of these at home going, oh no, we're not doing this again. Watch, the first one will be bad. Numbers 21, verse 8. Someone want to read that for us? Okay, so if you recall, the Israelites weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and they ran across these serpents that would bite them and kill them, right? So what did Moses do to help fix that problem? He lifted up a serpent, right? Lifted up a serpent, and if you looked at it, you're fine, right? Okay, that's the type. Okay, it's a shadow of what? Or maybe I should say who. Yeah, right. Jesus, right? The type is the serpent. The antitype is the real deal. It's Jesus. Okay? Does that make sense? A little bit? If you look at John chapter 14, John chapter 3, verse 14. Somebody read verses 14 and 15 of John chapter 3.
And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up.
Okay, so there you have the type and the antitype mentioned together. Okay, the antitype is the real deal. The type is the shadow. So the serpent was the type. Jesus is the antitype. Everybody with me so far? Okay? Somebody read Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 1. Okay, so the law was the shadow of things to come. So this is a pop quiz. Is the law the type or the antitype? The law is the type. Okay, in the New Testament, the New Covenant, Christ is the antitype. Everybody with me? Everybody got it? Great question. I didn't come up with the words. I don't know. That was my quote. Michael, here we go. Go. Hebrews 11, 19. That's great. Romans 5:14. So that was Hebrews 11. Now we're going to Romans 5:14. That's where the type comes from. And type meaning a shadow. So anti is opposite of a shadow, which is the real deal. Is that a fair assessment? Fair, I guess. I don't know. So, great. So there's two. Thank you. You saved me. I owe you two. So, all right. All right. So with that in mind, and I know where you're going first, I'm guessing. Somebody tell me, we're talking about baptism now. Let's not forget the focus of the class. Somebody tell me a type, a foreshadowing of baptism in the Old Testament. What? Okay, crossing the Red Sea. All right, so the Israelites come up and they're stuck, right? What's behind them? The Egyptians, right? And if they stay here, what's going to happen to them? They're going to die. Am I going to have to do proximity and come over and stand by you, Mr. Soon? All right, so they come up. Death is behind them, right? If they stay there, they're dying. Water, they go through the water to be saved, right? Okay, do you see how that points to baptism? Okay, I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay. All right, so there's one. Great. Is that the only one? Flood. Noah, right? Right? Noah. And Noah got his family on the ark, right? Went through. Everybody else died. They went through and were saved. Great. There's two. Is there only two? No, there's not two. Just two. What else? The reason that screen doesn't keep coming on is because there's a whole bunch. There's several listed, and I'm not giving you a cheat sheet. Oh, yeah. Survey says no. Okay, now, all right, so let's do this. Think about anybody that was saved through water. What? Naaman. Naaman was saved through water, right? What was he told by the prophet? Go dip 7 times in the Jordan. Was he happy about that? He was not happy about that, but did it cleanse him? It did cleanse him. So, Naaman, there's another one. Good. Anybody got any more? Oh, Moses. What? Baby Moses, right? If he would have stayed in the situation he was in, if his mom would have kept him there, what would have happened to him? He would have died, right? But she put him on the water. Off he went, and he went through the water, and he was saved. Oh, good. Oh, see, now we're thinking. Now you're looking. Now you're looking from a different perspective. When you first came in, you're like, the flood. Because that's what everybody goes to, right? Because you're going to throw to Peter. If I ask you for give me a New Testament verse for Noah, you're going to jump to Peter, which directly says it's a type. Okay? All right? Now, I'm going to change your perspective just a little bit since you're thinking good, and I like that. That's awesome. I'm excited about that. Now, when Jesus, baptism represents what? You got to be careful how you answer here. There's no wrong, well, there are wrong answers, but people say there's no wrong answers. That's not true. I'm an educator. There are wrong answers. Death, burial, resurrection. Okay, so if that's the antitype, can you think of anybody that was basically buried and came out alive in the Old Testament? Joseph. Joseph was buried by his brothers, was he not? He was put in a hole. He wasn't buried, but he was put in a hole. Okay, sorry. Got to watch my words. There was a wrong answer. There you go. He was put in a hole, and he came out the other side, right? That's the first time. It has actually happened twice to Joseph. Where was the other time? In prison, right? He was in prison. And it happened, and he comes out alive because some of the people that were in prison with him didn't make it out alive. So there's another one. Jonah. What a neat idea. Wow, how long was he in the belly of that fish? How long was Christ in the grave? He's under the water. He's buried. I mean, how many people do you know that were swallowed by a fish and you're like, they're coming out of that dude? None. Him. So he's a great example, right? It's not the only ones, though. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Right? Daniel. I mean, that's just a small list there. I mean, that's a pretty good list. Joshua and the Israelites when they came across the Jordan, right? So God is giving us and setting us up for stuff about baptism. It's not, he started this a long time ago. He started laying the groundwork for this a long time ago. This is not a new concept. He was pointing to it the whole time. He was pointing to it. There's a lesson that I've been studying that I would love to share with you sometime. Joseph points to Christ his entire life. Doesn't necessarily know it, but go and look. Go study Joseph sometime. You want to talk about a type, antitype? Joseph, every step of the way, is pointing to Christ. God has been pointing us to Christ and setting up the groundwork for baptism from the beginning, or very early on. All right. We've talked about that stuff. Okay. I've been really enjoying Michael's study on Sunday morning about Leviticus because Leviticus points to Christ. Again, type, antitype, because all those sacrifices that he's talking about, Christ is all of those, all in one, which is pretty cool. All those washings, there's a reason for it. I got to watch how I say washings. There's no R in there. My wife gets on to me. May drive you crazy. I'm sorry. But you have two things going on in the Old Testament, in Leviticus. You've got this sacrifice thing going on. Michael's studying that big time. You also have this washing thing going on. Sacrifices were washed in the Old Testament. No, they weren't. Sacrifices were not washed in the Old Testament. You go, whoa, 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 whoa. Leviticus 1:9. You're wrong, Reednauer. That's why there's an asterisk beside it. Because I am wrong. Sort of. The only reason that that is being washed is because it is the back end of the animal, and it's basically to get the feces and stuff off of it. It's not to make it clean. The sacrifice is not washed to make clean, because the sacrifice is already clean, because it's an animal. You have clean, you have unclean. No sacrifice is washed to be clean. It already is. Otherwise, you can't use it to sacrifice. Does that make sense? Yes. The offerer is the one that is washed. And anything that touches the offerer. It is what is washed. Wrong one. And that's what we're talking about. You have to be washed. Now, this washing looks at different things in different places. Sometimes they'll wash their hands. Sometimes they'll wash their feet. Sometimes they'll wash their head. Sometimes they'll wash their whole body. Sometimes they'll just throw water on them. It just depends. So let's look at some of these verses. If you would, please, turn over with me to Exodus 19. Exodus 19, verses 10 and 11. If someone would be so kind as to read that. Fantastic. Wash. That's people. Notice, we're talking about people in that case. Somebody read Exodus 40, verses 12 through 15. Okay, now we're talking about Aaron's sons, but again, we're consecrating and we're setting them apart, but it is washing them. Numbers chapter 8, verses 5 through 7, and I'll read that one. Numbers chapter 8, verses 5 through 7. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites from among the people of Israel and cleanse them. Thus you shall do to them to cleanse them. Sprinkle the water of purification upon them, and let them go with a razor all over their body, and wash their clothes and cleanse themselves." And then he starts talking about the sacrifice. So to set apart, we're going to cleanse ourselves. Now there's some sacrifices that are also involved a lot of times, but when we're approaching God, we got to cleanse ourselves. God doesn't like it when we don't. I'll use an analogy here in a moment. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. Turn over to Leviticus chapter 17. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 15 and 16. Now we're starting to talk about the laws and what happens if you start touching dead bodies or you start doing some things that will make you unclean. Verse 15. For every person who eats what dies of itself or which is torn by beast, whether he is a native or a sojourner, shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash them and bathe his flesh, he shall bear his iniquity. Okay, so, again, wash, clean, cleanse ourselves. We wash our clothes. Look at my time. Somebody, let's turn over just real quick. We won't read all the verses. And we could, I eliminated a bunch of verses that I could have read just to prove the points. Look at Numbers chapter 31, verse 24. Numbers 31, verse 24, you must wash your clothes on the seventh day, and you shall be clean, and afterwards you can come into camp. So you have to wash your clothes. You can't, otherwise you're going to be unclean. We can go to Leviticus 15, 13, Leviticus 16, 17 again, and Numbers 19. All would do the same thing. We can go to Leviticus 14 and do the same thing. Let me use this analogy to see if it makes sense. Michael has been teaching class on Sunday mornings, and I use that because that's kind of our reference. As you can see, there's lots of those verses here. Is there anything sinful about a person having leprosy? No, there's not. You have leprosy. Is there anything sinful about a girl having a period? Nope. Is there anything sinful about a guy having a discharge? No, there's not. That's not the issue. Here's my analogy. See if this makes sense. Now, I'm going to very much simplify all of this. I'm an analogy person. That's what I do. That's what I do with kids. That's how I work. See if this makes sense to you. Mama June, that's my mom, she calls and she says, Scott and Michael, get in here. Uh-oh. I'm in trouble for something. I have been playing outside in the mud. Do I run straight into the house? You tell me. Do I run straight into the house? No. No, I'm still outside. I'm muddy. And she yells, Scott and Michael. I am in trouble. That's true. But my point is this. If I run into the house dirty, how many problems do I have now? 2. I stop at the door and I go, I'm not clean. Well, clean yourself up and get inside. When you approach God, you have to be clean right there and then. Is there stuff I got to reckon with June Reednauer on the Mama June on the inside? Yes. Is it the fact that I'm dirty right now? No. It's the fact that I didn't clean my room when she told me to. I have to reckon with those things once I get inside. But I can't come inside, because if I come inside and I approach God and I'm dirty, I now have 2 problems. Does that make sense to you? Because watch what happens. Go to Numbers 19. Numbers 19 and verse 20. Got nervous there. I was looking at 2020. I'm like, that's not it. Somebody read Numbers 19, verse 20. If I do not cleanse myself before I approach God, do I have a bigger problem? Yes, I have defiled whatever is involved, and that's a problem. Just because I have leprosy, that doesn't make me a sinner. That makes me a person with leprosy and I'm unclean. That does not make me, and you're probably going, wait a minute, I have to be clean when I approach him. If I approach him and I'm unclean, then I have a problem because I did not follow God's commands. Just like with June Riedenauer. When I'm unclean, at the Riedenauer house, Annette Riedenauer goes, you better get those clothes out and strip your clothes down right now and then you can go inside. That's the way it works. You have to cleanse yourself because if you don't, then you have a problem because you have defiled God. You've defiled the sanctuary, now you've gone against God's commands, and now you have a problem. Do you see the difference? Because here's the deal. In the Old Testament, we got this sacrifice thing going on. For the sins that I've committed, I've got to cleanse myself as I approach God. That doesn't take care of my sins. Me washing does not take care of any sins that I have. It cleans me right now, and then I have to have a sacrifice. And it has to be a blood sacrifice. And that's what Michael's lessons are on Sunday morning, are about all these sacrifices. You have two things running parallel in the Old Testament. You have a water thing that cleanses people of their uncleanness. You also have this blood sacrifice that are running parallel in the Old Testament to take care of their sin. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Am I making sense a little bit? This is no. You're not going to hurt my feelings by going no. Okay, look, I'm a teacher by nature. I'm not a lecturer. I know it sounds like when I'm up here, but if you don't understand, then I can't move on. It's against my being. No, yeah.
You know, first century people probably weren't the most hygienic.
Right.
Maybe this is a way for God to force them to take that.
Yeah. I mean,
Wash their clothes.
it keeps disease from being spread. It helps their hygiene. And if you go to the New Testament, does Jesus ever get into it with the Pharisees about this issue? No, he gets into it all the time because what does his disciples not do? Wash their hands. See, this is the problem because they took it too serious. They made it much bigger. And they start accusing him of it. Look at Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15, 1 through 11. And we won't have to go all the way through that. Look, it says, the Pharisees and the scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat. And he said, why do you break the commandments of God for the sake of a tradition? For God commands, honor your father and mother. Whoever reviles his father and mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father and mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father and mother. For the sake of the traditions, you have made void the word of God, you hypocrites. This is an issue. They've taken it way out of context. You have this washing thing going on. They wash. When John the Baptist is in the desert, he is talking about washing. He's changing it, though. And he's going to help make a turn. I've given you lots to think about tonight. And some of you are like, I don't know. Right. Think about it, though. Look at it. Michael? What's that?
I said, I'll tie your water and blood together there, 1 John 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the one who came by water and blood, and this is water after blood,
Correct. The Spirit, the water, the blood are all in agreement. Now, I'm gonna make a connection real quick to that. You have this water thing that's going this way, right? This purification, right? And you have this sacrifice thing, this blood, right? The water and the blood, and they run parallel in the Old Testament. What did Michael just show us happens to those two parallel lines? What do they do in the New Testament? They come together, right? Where do you see water and blood first together in the New Testament? Let me give you a hint. Cross, right? So you have this purification thing cruising along, you have this blood thing coming along, and then all of a sudden, when he pierces that side, what does John say came out? Water and blood. They converge with Christ. Everything converges with Christ. We will take this up next week. We're not done with this. We're not done, because I've given you a lot to think, a lot to study. I look forward to emails soon. Thank you.